Hello and welcome to the Indy Author podcast. Today, my guest is Diane Vallere. Hey, Diane, how are you doing?
Great. How are you, Matty?
I'm doing great, thank you. To give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, national bestselling author Diane Vallere writes funny and fashionable character-based mysteries. After decades of working for a luxury retailer, she traded fashion accessories for accessories to murder. A past president of Sisters in Crime, Diane started her own detective agency at age 10 and has maintained a passion for shoes, clues, and clothes ever since. And I invited Diane on the podcast, I think when we ran into each other at Malice Domestic, to talk about how to overcome promophobia. And Promophobia is the name of a book that Diane edited, I believe. Excellent. And so I actually think that the story of promophobia as a book, in addition to the content of promophobia, which we'll get to in a moment, is very interesting. So can you just give a little bit of background on how promophobia came about?
Yes. Promophobia was an idea I got when I was president of Sisters in Crime National. And I was thinking about what I wanted to do as my legacy project for the organization. And the number one question that I got from readers was, will Sisters in Crime help me sell my book? This was anytime I did any event where I was talking about the organization and people wanted to know what exactly will the organization do for them. That was the number one question. And I started thinking about the idea that no matter how you're published, no matter what you're writing, you ultimately are faced with that question of how am I going to sell my book? So creating something that was kind of marketing based that went to all authors, not specific to what path you choose to publish, would be something that would be valuable and hopefully would benefit the large population of our membership and more. So at that point, I kind of started reaching out to a couple of authors who I knew, and I put out a call on the Sisters in Crime listserv that we had at the time and floated the idea and asked people to volunteer if they had essays in mind that they thought they could write. I really didn't know what kind of reception we would get. And I had tons of interested people. I had so many interested people that I ended up with a wait list because we would have had a very, very thick book if we had taken them all.
It is a
And
very all-encompassing book. I'll be talking in a moment about all the topics that you address, but it's very interesting to just page through the table of contents and see all the names there and all the people who participated in pulling that together.
it's a really great team of authors. I couldn't be happier with the authors who participated. And what was interesting was as people came to me with what they thought they could write about, things started to easily slot into different categories. So it became easy to see that certain things were public facing, certain things were publicity facing, certain things were social media, and they kind of naturally fell into these buckets to be able to put them into chapters. So that was kind of a happy accident. And there were a few times where I thought, I need a few more essays for this one category. So people would say, I want to be involved. Tell me what you need. And I would say, do you have anything in mind? Could you write about any of these issues? So a few people did volunteer kind of to fill those holes because they had that experience. That worked out
Cool.
well.
Well, we're going to dive into. So I went through the table of contents. I pulled a couple of fears out, a couple of phobias out that I thought sounded especially interesting. But I thought it would make sense to start out about the idea of the 7 touches or the 7 channels. And I know I've always heard that a piece of advice that says somebody in your audience has to see something 7 times before they take action on it. So, that could play out as someone has to see my Facebook ad 7 times before they're going to click on it and read more about my book on the retail platform. But there was also the angle of this that was also using 7 channels to get to the people you want to reach. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I started thinking about the 7 touches. I heard about this through Mark Dawson did a course, and I heard about him mention it there. I had heard about it before, but I never really thought about it in terms of book promotion. And so I started thinking about how when I had a book launch, I would generally do one thing or 2 things. And so I challenged myself at that point to try to come up with 7 different things to do. And it was a little bit of a stretch. I could get to 4, but then those additional 3 were like, what else am I going to do? And I started thinking, okay, well, there's Facebook ads, there's, BookBub ads, there's Amazon ads, and you're like, well, that's 3, but that's kind of possibly hitting the same audience. So what else are you going to do? It was when I started trying to hit multiple channels in promoting something, that's when I started seeing better results. It wasn't the same as the results I got from one channel plus the results I got from a different channel. It was almost like it was better than the 2 of them combined. So when I layered in a 3rd thing or a 4th thing, I just started seeing overall this like halo effect that was maybe the person saw the Facebook ad, but they didn't act. And then later on, they got a blast from BookBub saying I had a new book out. Or maybe they got a free Booksy notification and then later on they saw my update on LinkedIn or different things like that. And I know I'm speaking a lot about social media, but that's kind of the online world. But it really started to become having multiple ways to get the message to an audience seemed to be far more effective than picking one way to get the message to the audience. And in terms of promophobia, then I started thinking it doesn't make it about finding the one essay that's going to change your life. It's about finding the combination of essays, maybe that the ideas that feel right to you. And maybe you'll say, well, I'm already doing this and I'm not getting results. Well, maybe that thing will be more effective if you layer in a different thing. So it kind of is a great way to shake something loose in the imagination, read and get ideas. So that's one of the things I do love about the 67 essays that are in this book that really speak to all different ways to do things.
Right. Well, let's dive into some of the actual advice that's offered in Promophobia. And when we go through the fear of, the book is divided into fear of different areas. And so the areas are not knowing your niche, the book community, social media, publicity, online promo, connecting with readers, going on your own or in a group, events, and thinking outside the box. And so right off the bat, I was very intrigued by fear of the book community. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. There are people who, writers traditionally work alone, and we don't always venture out to knock on doors and tell people about our books. It's sometimes easier for us to create our worlds and write our stories, but then when it comes to the publicity part, it's a little difficult. So the book community, it can be groups, it can be chapters of Sisters in Crime or the National Sister Crime Organization, or it could be the local bookstore. And I know a lot of people are intimidated by walking into a bookstore and introducing themselves as an author and trying to make that connection. And that is, in a way, is a fear of the book community because we love books. Booksellers love books. It should be a win-win. But a lot of people kind of have that fear of being shot down, of rejection. And we know if we go the traditional publishing route, we know rejection. We feel rejection pretty heavily when we start querying agents and then when our books go out on submission and things like that. We don't love that part of the process. So when we go face to face with the book community and we put ourselves up there for rejection again, it's a really uncomfortable place to be. But those can be the most supportive partners that we find. Those can be the people who champion our books. They love the fact that we wrote a book about where we live. They love the humor in our book and they want to suggest it to everybody. In some cases, we may have written a book that is kind of a crossover of different genres. And that bookseller might love it because they know they can suggest it to their mystery readers, to their science fiction readers, or to their rom-com readers, or a variety of people, depending on what's in the book. So sometimes those quirky little books that we are afraid to try to pitch because they don't fit in one place, those bookstore people can be our best partners. But I do see a lot of people are afraid of knocking on the.
It does. This is probably lapsing into one of the other categories a little bit, but as you were talking about that, and I was thinking of it in the context of the 7 channels, but the question specific to the book community is I can imagine people cutting off certain channels because of those couple of examples you listed, like BookBub ads and Amazon ads. Like you really don't get rejection through those. Like they go out, they show up in the email or they show up on an Amazon page and they either sell books or don't, but you're not dealing with the kind of uncomfortable situation that you might if you put up a Facebook ad, people started commenting, or if you put something in an email and then maybe people are responding in a way you don't want to. So I think that idea of thinking in terms of what you want your relationship with the book community to be could open up some of those channels that you might say, oh no, I'm never going to do a Facebook ad because I don't want to see what people have to say. Did you find that yourself?
Well, I have. I know that I've had books that I released very quietly. I would say that I was kind of that fear of what are people going to say, so I didn't really promote them or I didn't really do a big splash. I wrote the book and I published the book, so I felt good enough about the book to put it out there, but then I kind of thought, "Oh, well, I don't know how it's going to be received." And that's really you don't want to be in that position. You want to be confident enough when you're publishing a book that you want to tell the world. But I think it's natural for us to be nervous about the reception of a book. And I think sometimes the book community can be our biggest champions. Sometimes the book community can be, there's a lot of positive news that gets shared online in social media in the book community. So sometimes it can be intimidating because you think there's so much success out there. Am I going to be perceived as successful too, or am I going to be perceived as an imposter? I think there's a lot of that to battle through too, if you don't make those partners and those connections within the community.
Yeah, and keeping in mind that nobody's posting, "Guess what? I ran an ad and I didn't sell any books," or "Guess what? I haven't gotten any royalties for 4 months." You're not hearing
Right.
those stories, so it's not because they're not happening, it's because people don't toot their horn
Exactly.
about it.
Exactly.
So I do have to loop back and ask you if you ever landed on the 7 channels you were using.
For me, always try to hit 7 things, but it's not always the same 7 things. So it does change depending on what I'm doing. And if it's a new book, it'll be different than if I'm promoting my backlist, or if I decide to promote these. Those can be different things, but it might be a newsletter swap with another author, combined with some ads, combined with a bookstore event, combined with maybe another social media channel. There's a lot of online promotion that you can do if you have a discounted book. So maybe it's a discount of the previous book in a series with a link in the back of that book to pre-order the next book that I'm about to launch. So discounting one book can help drive sales, pre-orders into the next book. And then there's online promos to book to get that discounted book out to a bigger audience. So that becomes less about selling a 99-cent or a $1.99 book, and more about finding a way to get more people to know about the new book. So I'm just using a backlist book to bring awareness to the upcoming. So those kinds of things, and starting to think about what's the ultimate goal you want. Is the ultimate goal to sell units? Is the ultimate goal to make money? Is the ultimate goal to build your newsletter list? And each of those things can have a different effect, and kind of an overall effect, and a positive effect on whatever it is you're doing in the future.
The conversation about the different approaches you were using also makes me think of that idea that you offer different forms of your book, ebook, print book, audio, let's say, because you want to provide it where the reader is or the listener is. Different consumers of content are going to want that content in different ways. And it's exactly the same with promotion, that people that you might reach very effectively through social media ads, that's one group, but the group that is going to learn about you because you go to a bookstore event is a whole different group of people, or could be a whole different group of
Correct.
people, and you have to go where the audience is.
Correct. In fact, most of the people who go to bookstore events are not the ebook crowd. So if all of your marketing is targeted to the ebook audience, you are ignoring a portion of readers that exist. And getting an event at a bookstore can be more challenging, but there might be a festival that you can participate in with other authors. And if they write it similar, either similar setting or similar genre or similar voice, then all of you are pulling a shared audience together. So there are other ways to get in front of the book buying audience. It doesn't have to be a bookstore, but there is certainly an audience there in addition to the online. And there's the audiobook audience too. So, and there's a large print audience and a library audience. So that is another way to kind of think about all the different ways to get in front of a person, a reader.
It would be interesting to look at each format that one offers a book in and say, what are, maybe 7 would be stretching it for each medium, but say at least 3. What are 3 things I'm going to do to help promote my audio? What are 3 things that I'm going to do to help promote my ebook? And those might be 2 different sets of things.
Yes. I think the most challenging I've ever thought of it is, can I do 7 things for my series, 7 things for my new book, and 7 things for the discounted the book that I discount prior to the new book. And that becomes a lot, because then you're like, okay, that's 21 things and that's one series. So if there's another series in the background, you start thinking like, okay, I guess I'm not writing anything new this month because all I'm doing is promotion. But I think the goal is just to strive to get to these different channels, because as you are able to do that, you start to see results. And that's ultimately what we all want.
Yeah. The discussion of the book community reminds me of a podcast episode that just came out recently. 194 is tips for attending writers' conferences. So if people are looking for tips on how to feel more comfortable wading into that book community, that was with Jim Azevedo. And one of the suggestions he had was the 1 drink rule, which is not what you might think it is. It was that if you go to like the ballroom where they're having the mingle, the meet and greet, then you have to commit to, even if you pick up a bottle of water, you have to commit to stay there long enough to drink your bottle of water. And by that time, chances are somebody will have engaged you, you will have engaged someone, you will have started a nice conversation to kind of ease you into that.
That's a good rule.
Yeah. Another fear that struck my fancy here was connecting with readers. So on the surface, that's something, that it's sort of like the holy grail of what we want to do. But what are the phobias surrounding connecting with readers?
Similar to the phobia of connecting with the book community in the, will people like what I did? Will they reject me? Will they enjoy it? Will they tell me what they don't like about the book? Will they, yeah, we have a tendency to want to hear all the good things about our book and not necessarily hear the criticisms, but there's also there's a wall between readers and writers that doesn't need to be there. And I think it's really broken down a lot with social media. But when you think about going to a book club and talking about your book in a book club or being on a panel at a conference and talking about your book there, those are really great opportunities to connect with readers. And it's getting away from the idea that I'm a writer, I sit at a computer and I write all day and I click a button and there goes my book. It's the after part. It's the, now I have a book, I want to tell people, I want to contact bloggers, or I want to, do a blog tour or things like that, and how to find readers to help engage them in sharing the word about your book, how to get them to write reviews if they like the book, to help the book find an audience, things like that.
Just a quick break from the interview. Are you getting value from the podcast? Please consider supporting it and all the work I do at the Indy Author by becoming a patron. To pledge a monthly contribution, go to patreon.com/the Indy Author, or to make an occasional contribution, perhaps to indicate the value that a specific episode or resource provided to you on your creative voyage, scroll to the bottom of any page at theindyauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee. And now, back to the interview. Yeah, I think that this idea of thinking through how ready you're going to be to get your book in front of people is a really good final checkpoint. If you're about to hit that button that says publish, first put yourself in that position of, okay, and then the next thing I need to do is to read the reviews that come in, or the next thing I have to do is stop by my local bookstore. And if that feels uncomfortable beyond the normal discomfort of putting yourself out there or opening yourself to rejection, maybe it's a red flag that you really shouldn't be hitting publish quite yet. It's just it's another sort of temperature taker to see if
Yes.
you're ready to go or not.
I think I heard someone say you need to look at your system from start to finish and identify the bottleneck in your funnel, basically. And that's the place where you need to solve your problems. So in terms of writing a book and publishing it and promoting it, like the whole continuum, maybe you can write it really easily. Maybe you're very technically great at publishing it, but maybe once you publish it, you're not very good at the promotion side of things. Well, then that's the place where you need to kind of figure out, what's it going to make me, what do I have to do to feel really good about this book so that I want to tell the world? And maybe it's something back in the earlier part. Maybe it's hiring a second proofreader, or maybe it's getting a timeline editor, or maybe it's upgrading your covers, or whatever it is, because chances are if you publish your book and you're not excited about getting the word out, there's some reason that you don't feel great about it. And that means going back in your process and figuring out, what could I have done differently so that when it got here, I didn't have this same nervous feeling about it.
Yep, I love that. So another one of the phobias that struck my fancy here is going on your own or in a group. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, there are a lot of opportunities with authors to share their audiences. There's so much we hear about growing your own newsletter base, but there's a lot of opportunities for authors to do newsletter swaps or to cross promote each other. There are also opportunities for people to do an anthology, multiple books or multiple stories in one book that everybody can promote, and that promotes the whole group. I know some authors who have written a book that has their 4 protagonists in the book and they just alternate chapters. And that's just a fun thing for their readers because they're discovering each other through there, but they're kind of getting a new book with that character in it. So it's almost like the author was able to give them an extra book that year, but it's fun because they're getting other characters they may not know. And lots of these things I've seen bundles even where authors will all put their book 1 in a bundle, and then they all promote that that collection. It's a real or like a box set or an omnibus. And so everybody's getting their book 1 out there, but again, it's going to a whole bunch of different readers who maybe never tried that series. So these are all just different ideas where authors can come together and help each other out. And even in the production side of things, authors can brainstorm through plot, authors can brainstorm through marketing, and sometimes what somebody else says will give you a brand new idea that you had never even thought of. So I think that idea of operating in a group, it's different think than writing a book, which is so singular, but it can help us in the long run to kind of realize that we're not really alone in this process.
I just co-wrote a short story with Jean Gorman, who was the former president of Sisters in Crime Delaware Valley. And she has the Adam Kaminsky detective mystery series set in Philadelphia. And I had the Ann Kinnear suspense series set also in Philadelphia. And conveniently enough, in the first book, before I ever knew about Jane's books, Anne had an ex-boyfriend named Dan Kaminsky. And so I kept saying to Jane, we have to get Anne together with Dan's cousin, Adam, and have them do something. And that was a really fun process, both a really fun creative process, but also exactly as you're saying, hopefully we're introducing Anne to Jane's fans and introducing Adam to my fans. So that was a fun cross-promotional thing, but also I think a really good indication of the importance of engaging the book community. In this case, it was Sisters in Crime, because you find those people with those common interests, common goals that you can help each other out.
I know for me, my very first publication credit was a Sisters in Crime Guppy anthology. It was the Guppy's first anthology. And I had joined I joined Sisters in Crime and Guppies, and I was trying to get an agent for my first book. And I was encouraged to write an article for the newsletter. And then I was encouraged, hey, we're going to have an anthology. You should think about writing a story. And I did, and it got in. And it really, at that point, I thought, I've been checking books out of the library about how to get published and trying to find agents and figuring out what I was doing. And I was felt kind of swimming upstream, not really having a lot of knowledge. And, very quickly, having joined that organization, opportunities opened up for me. I met people who went on to blurb my books and were instrumental in different parts of my career and got that first publication credit. So that was a clear example of in a group being much stronger and really like compressing time versus trying to do it all on my own.
Yeah. And can you just describe briefly what Guppies is?
Oh, yes. And Guppies is a chapter of Sisters in Crime. It's an online chapter, and it stands for the Great Unpublished, or that's where it started from. So the idea was that everybody who was trying to get published was researching a part of the book world, and sharing that information was going to make everybody stronger than trying to figure it out on their own. So people were coming together, started this chapter, everybody started sharing information, and it's grown. It's the largest chapter of Sisters in Crime now. And it really does serve as a great pool of advice, inspiration, examples of what people have done, cheerleading squad for anything that you might come up against in your career. It really helps you feel less alone in trying to find the way to publish your book, and any question you have to ask, it's a great place to ask those questions. So I found it to be, I've met some of my best friends through the Guppies.
Yeah, I'll have to have like Guppy Emeritus, because many of the great unpublished are now published. So we'll be
Yes.
like the next level for people to move into. Um, so thinking outside the box, phobia about thinking outside the box. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Well, I think we, as writers, we were readers first, and we know how we discovered books. So we very easily know what is available to us in terms of finding readers or selling books. We may not be comfortable going through all those channels, but we kind of know about bookstores, and we know there's online retailers, and you can book ads, and all the very traditional things. But the fear of thinking outside the box is really that sense of, I'm going to try something and I have no idea if this is going to work. And sometimes these things cost some money. So we're doing something to sell a book, and there might not be any connection between what we're doing, any quantifiable connection. So we might never know if those things did anything for us or not. So I think a lot of people shy away from those crazy ideas, but for that reason, they want a direct result. They want to know, I spent $1 and I made this much. But it's those bigger things that can get us attention. They can get people to notice us where they maybe never heard of us. They can, they can draw bigger groups of readers to us than we might pull on our own. And it's just like that bookstore thing where it's a reader who goes to a physical bookstore versus online. thinking outside of the box and doing something a little bit kooky can be a way to grab people who don't buy a lot of books, and maybe they will buy ours, or they might see ours and say, I need a gift for somebody and this is perfect. So it's raising awareness around a kind of a different audience of people, but it can be very effective.
Can you think of any examples from your own author career or maybe contributors to the anthology where people thought outside the box and had a successful result?
I know there are good examples in the book. I'm trying to think of one for my own, and I don't have an. The weather kind of plagued me a little bit, but recently, I have a series that has a character who is enamored of Doris Day. She's modeled her life and her business after Doris Day. So I recently sponsored a showing of Pillow Talk at the Colonial Theater in Phoenixville, and basically, I've never seen Pillow Talk in a theater, so I really did want to see the movie in a theater. But also, my name went up on the marquee and it said sponsored by local author Diane Vallere. So it kind of like it maybe triggered that curiosity of author. What did she write? Pillow Talk. Oh, Doris Day. And it's a different way to make those connections versus a book channel. Now there was a torrential downpour that happened the night of the movie, so we didn't
I
have a full house.
remember that torrential. That was truly a torrential downpour.
It was sunny when I went in the theater because I got there early. And then before the movie started, I walked out and it was black and the rain was kind of going sideways and
Yeah.
cars were pulling away really rapidly. And I thought, I think we have as many people as we're going to get tonight. This isn't going to be the big thing that I had hoped. But we did have, it wasn't just me. Let's put it that way. It wasn't just me in the audience, which I would have been fine with if it was, but we did have people in the audience. So it was a fun thing to do. But I think those kinds of things, you don't know what they're going to do. Like I will never know who saw that marquee or saw that ad on their website and went on to buy a book. There's no way to measure that. But I do know that it's something that I had never done before, just like doing ads in the back of Atomic Ranch magazine, which is a mid-century modern leaning magazine. My character is a mid-century modern decorator. I'll never know who saw that ad and went on to buy the book or learn about the books, but it's a different way, kind of a different idea outside of just the usual book selling things.
Those are both super cool ideas. I think the closest I can come, I hesitate to say it because it's so boring in comparison to those, but there's a diner near me that all their coffee cups are just random coffee cups. And so I had some leftover coffee cups from a promotional thing that had my book on one side, my name on the other side, my book covers. And so I brought in a couple and left them. And I thought, this is going to be interesting. Like someday somebody might be drinking their coffee and say, I wonder who this person is. But like a year later, I went there with my husband and they brought my husband his coffee in one of my coffee mugs. And I thought, what are the chances?
What a good payoff with
It was super fun just for that.
Yes. One thing that I didn't mention yet is each of the sections in Promophobia ends, the last essay in each of the sections is a fail. Because that's the thing about promotion is that everything doesn't work. And what works for one person might not work for another person, but it's good to know that people try things that don't work too, because we learn from that as well as we learn from the successes. And the fear of thinking outside the box, Elsie Hayden wrote a very, very funny essay, and it is the fail for that chapter. And I'm not going to get into what she talks about, but it was the perfect essay to wrap up the book because it really does kind of let you know that sometimes you really never know how your promotional efforts are going to go. So if anyone's thinking about checking out Promophobia, you've got a nice little nugget at the end of the book there.
Yeah, all sorts of nuggets here. And there were two things that I wanted to follow up on to sort of wrap up our conversation. One is that I think that the story about the Colonial Theater showing and the torrential rain that probably kept many of the people away that otherwise would go, that definitely hits one of my big phobias. I would say my biggest promotional phobia is having an event and nobody shows up. And for a while, I was not doing in-person events, in part because I kind of couldn't justify it on a cost benefit basis. Like if I did a signing in Mechanicsburg, it meant that I had to pretty much set aside the entire day to load my books up, drive to Mechanicsburg, have the event, reload all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, well, maybe it's just better if I spend the day writing. Mm-hmm. And then through conversations with a number of podcast guests, among other people, I thought, well, that's kind of not the right way to be thinking about it, because I'm getting benefits out of those events beyond book sales. Like I'm probably never going to sell enough books at those events to pay me back for some kind of hourly rate that I assign myself, but I'm getting something else. I'm getting like the energy that you get from interacting with people and so on. And so I sort of stepped back into in-person events, but the rule I gave to myself is I'm never going to either arrange or accept an in-person event unless it's going to be fun, even if nobody shows up. And so a lot of the times, like when one of my books came out, I got in touch with the winery. It's based in a winery, and I got in touch with the owners of the winery, and I said, would you be open to having a launch party? And they've been already very involved because they'd helped me with some of the details, the research details of the book. And they said yes. And then I got in touch with Jane Gorman, who I already mentioned, and she has a book, The Cape May Cozy Mysteries, that it's mysteries with a twist. So there was like a drink theme of each of them. And I said, is it okay if I bring somebody else along? That also has this kind of alcoholic beverage theme going on in her books, even though her books are quite different. And I thought, you know what? In the worst possible circumstance, it's going to be Jane, her husband, me, my husband, sitting around drinking wine. Like, that's a pretty nice way to spend an afternoon. So I just got over the phobia by saying, I'm going to make it so I'm going to enjoy myself, even if nobody shows up.
Yes. Someone told me once that a bookstore event is not about the number of people who show up at the bookstore event. It's not about the number of books sold at the bookstore event. It's really, for the author, it's about being included in the newsletter list that the bookstore sends for weeks before the event, where you are included and your book cover is included every time, letting the world know about your book. And for you, it's about supporting the bookstore by you telling your own audience, I'm going to this bookstore. Whether you're raising awareness for them, they're raising awareness for you. And that's really what a bookstore event is. So you may sell one copy of your book at an event, but hundreds of thousands of people may have heard about your books through the newsletter and may have gone on to purchase it in any number of ways, or maybe told somebody else about it. And that's the thing that you don't know. So really, that took a lot of the pressure off of bookstore events to me, because I started thinking, okay, I don't have to worry if nobody shows up, because we know that sometimes people don't show up to events. I mean, that's just the way it is. Weather can certainly affect it. There's all kinds of things that can affect it. But, you still know that you're getting your message out. You're getting your book out to people just by participating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And I sort of capitalized on that idea, although I hadn't framed it up quite that way. And I think this was during COVID, and I had a book coming out, and I didn't want to do a launch for obvious reasons. And I got in touch with a local bookstore who has been very supportive of me in the past. And I said, I'm doing a virtual launch. And if you'll include information on my virtual launch in your newsletter, then I'll direct anyone who's buying the book in the area to go to your store and purchase it there or order it from you there. And, also set it up so that people could order through bookshop.org and have the sale credit that bookstore if they weren't in the area. So, yeah. So I wanted to kind of wrap up by talking about my other phobia, which was triggered by reading the table of contents of Promophobia, which is, there are like, I forget how many you said, 67 ideas or something like that. And so my phobia is, oh my God, do I have to do them all? So can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Short answer is no. The longer answer is you find the things that feel natural and fun to you. Because when you do something that feels natural to you, you will do it better than if you try to do something that you really don't want to do. And that, all these fears, we talked a lot about the fear of rejection, the fear of, no one showing up, the fear of trying something that doesn't work. But there are going to be things that you read and you think, oh, I could do that. And those are the things you should gravitate toward, because when they feel like they're doable, everything in here, 67 essays, every essay does not feel doable to every person. And that's the beauty of it, because you will read some and you'll say, I could do that. And you'll read others and say, no, I'm not going to do that at all. So when you find the ones that you want to try, do them, try them, make them your own. And that's when you'll start to have success, because people will recognize that you're doing something that seems comfortable to you, that you're not trying to be somebody that you aren't. So I would say you find one or two, and then when you layer them in, maybe then the next book launch, you layer in a third, you experiment with different things. And that's how you find your own formula that's going to work for you.
Oh, great. Well, Diane, thank you so much for talking about those pieces of advice from Promophobia. And please
hold the book up again.
Yeah, please do. That's always a key promotional tool. And
Yes.
please let people know where they can go to find out more about Promophobia and also about your own books online.
Yes. Well, people can find out Promophobia is available at all major retailers. And there is detailed information about the book on the Sisters in Crime website, which is at sistersincrime.org. And you can find information about Promophobia there. And it's available for bookstores to order. If you want a print copy, you can walk into any of your indie bookstores and ask them to get you a copy, and they can easily order it for you. So we wanted to make it very accessible to the bookstore, our bookstore partners. And if you're a library reader and you want to ask your library to carry it, they can order it too. And my own books, like you said in my bio, I write fun, fashionable fiction, character-based stories. I have a series that's set in Berks County, Pennsylvania. So that is my, not Philly, but Philly adjacent. That's
Yes.
my Pennsylvania series. And didn't live here when I started writing it, but I am back in Pennsylvania. So it's definitely a novelty to drive around and point at things and say, hey, that was book 7. Hey, that was book 12. So I do have those moments. I also write Madison Knight, who is the Doris Day loving sleuth. And I have a series set in outer space. And I have a fabric shop series that has a new book coming out in October.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.